Hello everyone and welcome back to Mossy Bottom, my 2-hectare smallholding here in southwest Finland. The trees are in leaf, the meadows in flower as you can see behind me, the pond and forest are alive with insects and birds, the summer cottages, of which there are many around here, are full of Helsinkians on their holidays. It's late May and the sun doesn't set until midnight. Summer has well and truly arrived here in the archipelago where I live, and it is absolutely breathtaking. But my focus since about April has been on figuring out how to grow food for self-sufficiency at what is 60 degrees latitude. And for those of you in the UK, that's as far north as the Shetland Isles. In the US, it's almost as far north as Anchorage, Alaska. This is my first growing season here in Finland, so nothing is yet established. I moved here from Ireland in late September last year, and quite a few of you have commented in the videos I've made in that time that growing food here in Finland will be harder than it was in Ireland due to the shorter growing season. But is that true? Well, I think it annoyed or vexed a few of you Finnish folk who have of course been growing food here very successfully since time began, or at least since people have been living here. The short growing season and climate certainly present a whole different set of problems to those which I faced when growing food in Ireland, which I did for 7 years there. But problems which I hope that I too, just like the Finnish people, can overcome. And that is what this video is all about. But why aren't you working on the house, Daniel? Shouldn't that be the priority instead of growing food? Well, look, the priority for me has and always will be quality of life. That's why I'm here. And that means incorporating the aspects of self-sufficiency which I most love into everyday life, not something that I'm aiming for as a distant goal. And for me, there is something magical about taking a seed and turning it into a meal, or even a dozen meals, 2, 3, 4 months down the line. It's always felt like some alchemical process. Every stage from germination to potting on to planting out to watching flowers and fruits develop is hypnotic to me. And like all of us, I don't know how many more seasons I'll get to experience that joy. So no, my priority is living for the things that I love every day. And that includes working on the house, but as part of something greater. When I grow food on my own land, I wake up every morning excited to see what's changed. And sometimes what's changed is that slugs or mice or caterpillars have devastated your crop. But that's just another one of those problems which makes food growing so interesting. There are so many variables at play, from temperature range, how hot the days are, how cold the nights are, to rainfall, soil drainage, wind speed, soil type, acidity and alkalinity levels, pests and predation, of course, airborne and soil-borne diseases. I could go on and on, but I won't, because although I studied horticulture for 3 years, I am not a teacher, and the content I create in these videos is not actually intended to educate, but to entertain, and most importantly, to inspire. So let's start with that most entertaining and inspirational of things, a graph. This is a min and max temperature comparison between Sligo in Ireland, where I used to live, and Turku here in Finland. And in terms of maximum temperature, Finland has a clear advantage from the beginning of May to the beginning of September. And that 3 to 4 degree difference can take a month off how long it takes a potato crop to grow. Or it can determine whether outdoor tomatoes ripen or don't ripen in a given season. It's significant and it's cumulative, as you can see in this second graph, which shows growing degree days. That basically translates as accumulated plant growth. And you can see from early June, due to those longer, hotter days, Finland again has a big advantage, at least this part of Finland. More growing degrees, more plant growth. What that means is that if at the beginning of June your vegetable crop is already well established, then you have 3 really good months in which it can produce a crop. But there's a problem, of course there is, which people with longer growing seasons, like in Ireland, the UK, much of the US, don't have to worry about. And that's, how do you germinate vegetable seedlings during cold, often freezing spring months? This year we had heavy snowfall in late April, and it's common here to have overnight frosts throughout May, even late May. Look at all these wild strawberries growing on the ground of the orchard. This is a crop I never expected. I knew we'd have blueberries in the autumn and other types of berries and mushrooms, but this was an absolute surprise and a delight. If you've never tried wild strawberries, they have a really kind of spicy, sharp taste, but they're very, very delicious and quite different to the strawberries that you buy in the supermarket, or even the ones that you grow yourself. Absolutely delicious. In Ireland, I propagated seeds in my polytunnel in March and April, and at most I would add a thin agricultural fleece overnight to protect from minor frosts. It might get to -3, 4, maybe 5 at most, and that worked. By early to mid-May, those overnight frosts were long gone, and the priority was planting out, banking on the long growing season, not the hot one, to give your plants enough time to ripen. I would often harvest as late as October, even November, and some crops, as you know, I would leave in the ground all winter long. In Finland, it could be -10 overnight in late April. This year it was in the 3rd week of April. So, what's the solution? Well, there are many solutions depending on your situation. You could heat your polytunnel or greenhouse with a propane, kerosene, or even an electric heater. But that's going to be expensive if you're dealing with temperatures like -10. And if it costs you more money to grow food than it does to buy it, even in a Finnish supermarket, which are unbelievably expensive by the way, then it's more a hobby than it is self-sufficiency. So if self-sufficiency is your goal, as it is mine, you can't just throw money at the problem. You could use windowsills in your house, a great option, because you're already heating the room and there's plenty of light. But personally, I just don't have nearly enough windowsill space for the quantity of seedlings that I want to grow. Again, a great option if you're a hobby grower, not so great for self-sufficiency. What about a conservatory attached to the house, which of course is also heated, at least enough to not freeze overnight, and that's all that really matters. This is an even better option because it gives you space for many, many plants. It gives you light and, of course, heat from the house. The one catch, not many people have heated conservatories. I certainly don't, never have, and probably never will. And those that do might not be so enthusiastic about giving up that precious human space to thousands of plant pots every spring. None of those options would really have worked for me. But I think I found one that does, and I hinted at it in the last video. Through that door is the tiny 2 metre by 3 metre basement of my 100-year-old timber-framed house. It's pitch black in there because there are no windows, but it's quite an unusual basement in that it's very well insulated. Above, on all sides, including the double door, and that's because, rightly or wrongly, it's where the previous owner of this house decided to install an immersion heater, which heats and holds the hot water for the house. So it's been insulated well to try and trap and contain that heat. And back in February, when it was as cold as -26 degrees Celsius outside, I noticed going in and out of there that it never dropped below freezing inside this basement. In fact, it was often warmer than the rest of the house was, much like an airing cupboard would be. And that gave me an idea. And I suspect by now you've probably worked out where this is going and where we're going. Look at that, folks. I can confirm we have a crop of plums on these very old trees, 49 trees. Each has hundreds of plums on it, so I'm going to have a huge crop this year, I think. Completely unexpected because these trees are old, they haven't been well maintained, they haven't been mulched for a long time, and I cut them back heavily to try and lower them so that the plums would be easier to harvest. So I'm absolutely shocked and delighted that in year 1 I'm going to have a crop of plums. So the majority of vegetable seeds need 3 things to germinate. That's to start growing. They need moisture, they need oxygen, and they need warmth. And for the most part, they don't need light. And people focus too much on providing light initially, like in a greenhouse, and then spend a lot of money trying to make that light place warm. I decided instead to choose a dark but warm place and spend a lot less money on trying to make it light. Just light enough for early seedling growth. It takes a lot less energy to produce light than it does heat. And the way to do that is with grow lights. Grow light technology has come on immensely in the last decade or two with the use of LEDs. You can now buy them at exactly the right frequency for vegetable seedlings and with a dimmer switch so you can provide just the right amount of light at the right time of day. My setup here is 100 watt on a timer, providing just enough light for optimal growth. I built the wooden frame that I'm now sitting on to the exact dimensions of 8 of these IKEA trays, which you can see here, which are 70 centimeters by 35 centimeters and cost an unbelievably cheap €2 per tray. Talk about a loss leader. They're intended to be used, of course, as shoe racks, or perhaps just to get people through the door of IKEA, but make perfect and very cheap watering trays. I lined the frame with insulated foil, as you can see, to reflect back as much light and trap as much heat as possible. This stuff is really, really handy for creating something like this. And then back in April, I planted my seeds. Now, unfortunately, it was late April because I've had so much to do that I was basically a month behind where I wanted to be. But still, they worked, and I'm really proud of the results I've had in the month since. Most of those seedlings have already been potted on and moved out. There's a few things here that I planted later, and peppers, which are very slow to germinate and grow, so they haven't gone out yet. But overall, I'm delighted at how well this has worked. The great thing about growing indoors is there are very few predators, like slugs, to contend with. I do worry slightly about mice, but this year at least, there's no evidence, and I do keep checking, that they're actually coming in here. Though they certainly could if they wanted to. It's very, very difficult to keep mice out. That's something I'll be monitoring though in future years, mouse traps at the ready. And yes, modern grow lights are safe and intended to be used inside your home. They produce very little heat, unlike old-fashioned grow lights used to. They're also very energy efficient, low heat devices, so the fire risk is no more than any other electrical appliance. My plan next year is to start germination in here from mid-March to mid-April. And I could, of course, add some low wattage heat pads beneath these trays in that initial week or two if I need a bit of extra heat in the early spring to kickstart germination. But I hope by May to be ready to move everything outside to my next creation. Let's go take a look. I've been doing a lot of building work this spring. This is a potting on greenhouse which I built at the beginning of May. It's about 3.5 square meters and it allows me to upgrade seedlings to bigger pots where they can mature through most of May without being at risk from overnight frosts, and that is the key function of this structure. It's built on a south-facing wall of my house against a thick stone and block plinth with an added brick foundation underneath the greenhouse, all of which stores a lot of thermal energy from sunlight every day. The walls and roof of the greenhouse are made from 16mm polycarbonate with a honeycomb structure, which is more typically used in conservatory roofs because it's very strong, meaning it can support the weight of snow. But I chose it because that honeycomb structure has a much higher insulative value than other types of polycarbonate sheet. It functions a lot like triple glazed windows, just one that you can cut to any shape and size. It's not cheap though, €50 per 2 metre sheet, and I used 3 sheets in the construction of this. It's also UV protected, so should resist sun damage for many years. As you can see, most of my crop is in here and it's well established. Many things really urgently need to be planted out now, like the corn and the pumpkins. And the principle of this mini greenhouse is really simple. Heat up the plinth at the back and the brick foundation underneath with light energy from the sun every day, just like charging a battery. And then discharge that energy as well as some heat loss from the house to stop this greenhouse from freezing overnight. And it works. We had a night in which it fell to -5 degrees Celsius when I first built this outside, and inside it held at +7. The best part is that this requires absolutely no additional heating, so no costly propane or kerosene heaters or electric heaters needed. And yes, it's small, but everything in here will be planted out in June. It's for potting on, just that transitional month or two. And keeping the space small makes it much easier to keep it warm overnight. But what happens to it in June when everything in here is planted out onto my land? Well, I designed it in such a way that the roof can be completely detached. It's on hinges that easily undo. And I filled it with dark soil, which is nutritious and fertile, and of course absorbs heat well too. But also, that allows it to turn into a raised bed, meaning a few select heat-loving annuals can stay in here and be planted out to produce fruit through the summer months. Probably this year, tomatoes. In the spirit of complete transparency, I'll tell you about the 1 or 2 drawbacks I've encountered so far with this design. The first, believe it or not, is blackbirds, or at least one very cunning blackbird, which slips in through the ventilation gap at the top of the greenhouse and then uproots the seedlings inside their pots. They have an instinct to do this, looking for insects and grubs around the roots of young plants. In Ireland, I've recorded a single blackbird hopping along a line of 30 brassica seedlings, uprooting every single one with a flick of its beak in under 3 minutes. Of course, I wasn't there, my camera was, so I wasn't able to intervene. But all that was just to catch a worm or 2 for its breakfast. Of course, it's not the blackbird's fault. It's just acting on instinct to get food, and I have no hatred towards blackbirds, believe me, but there is definitely a dark side to that morning chorus, which we all love so much. And if you're not a food grower, you probably had no idea. Think about that the next time you see a blackbird on your bird table. So the final step of my food growing plan here in Finland is, of course, planting out, which will happen in June, which it almost is. By the time this video goes live, it may well have happened already, giving those vegetable plants 3 to 4 months of long days with reliable sun. I have about a hectare of meadow on my plot, and half of that I'm hoping to keep as meadow for pollinators and wildlife. The other half, like the area behind me, will become my vegetable plot, which I'll extend in future years. So far this year, I've planted out the potatoes. You can see those behind me to the right. 3 different varieties with enough yield for our entire family. That's 3 of us for a year. And you can see I'm in the backbreaking process of digging and de-weeding the soil for the other veggies, which will join the potatoes very, very soon. This was, of course, all wild meadow, so it's full of perennial weed roots and seeds. And I grow organically, so no herbicides or chemicals to control weed growth. But why not practice no dig, I hear you cry? Well, I do practice no dig, but not in year 1. I learnt that the hard way in Ireland, not when converting meadow to growing area. And I made a full 20-minute video when I was back in Ireland about why that is. So if you're interested in no-dig growing, or maybe you practice it yourself and want to hear my perspective on it, then do watch that video. From next year onwards, I'll do very little digging on this plot, only enough to get rid of additional weed growth with heavy mulching. As you all know, I do everything by hand, but many of you have suggested in the comments that I invest in an old tractor, and that is something I'm now considering. It would be so useful for snow ploughing and moving logs in the winter, cultivating and spreading compost in the summer. I, of course, would have a tiny budget for that, so it would need to be an old second-hand machine, and my biggest concern would be maintenance costs should that break. I'd love to hear in the comments how other people have managed that dilemma, especially here in Finland where labour costs are so high. Is everyone just an accomplished home mechanic? Is that just something you have to become as a farmer? I can change oil, and at a push I can fit a new spark plug, but beyond the very basics I have no mechanical expertise, so I'm still on the fence about whether the investment of an old tractor is worth the risk if, or more likely when, it breaks. Finally, let's talk about the #1 pest here in Finland, which people never fail to mention in comments, and that's deer. As I've mentioned many times in these videos, we see whitetail and roe deer in our garden constantly, especially in the morning when they're feeding, and it's a real treat. I absolutely love seeing them. But I'm also very aware that a single deer could destroy our entire crop in less than an hour, especially when it's just been planted out in its early stages. In fact, our neighbour, who's in his late 70s and has lived here most of his life, I believe, said that planting any kind of food crop here, even potatoes, is just giving the deer a free meal. And he's probably right. So we have invested in 200 metres of 2-metre high wire mesh fence. And I'm going to be installing that in the next week or two. It should keep out the deer as well as various other things like hare, which there are a lot of here, rabbits, and other types of pests which may damage the crop here. Of course it won't do anything to stop birds getting in, but I think deer, hare, those are the main threats to destroying our veg garden. It was a huge investment, around 500 euros, plus the fence posts which I have to make, and it needs a lot of those every 2 to 3 meters. But without that investment, we probably wouldn't get any crop at all. And this is all about the long term, so it's a necessary one. One of the aspects of self-sufficiency that people often don't talk about is the setup cost to get everything working in such a way that you can grow food, you can keep livestock, you can process compost and everything else that's involved effectively. The payoff comes later when you do save money, but not in that first or second or even third year. It's an investment in your future, not just of time, but of money too. So in conclusion, how does one grow food at 60 degrees latitude here in Finland? Well, the same way that one grows food anywhere in the world, and that's by adapting to the climatic and environmental conditions around you. Start the crop early in a heated space, pot on rather than planting out in May to avoid frosts, and make sure your outdoor growing space is as pest-proof as you can make it. Of course, I'll further adapt this strategy in the years to come based on what works and what doesn't. I'm not saying it's perfect now, or indeed that I've thought of everything. I certainly haven't. For me though, and so many other growers I think, that is half the fun. It's not about getting it perfect the first time. It's a puzzle that you have to solve very patiently year on year. And that slow incremental progress is so satisfying. When you do get it right, you feel empowered. You feel independent from the system that controls most people in this world. And of course, you feel very proud, which for me makes it all worth it, even if the house takes that bit longer because of it. So get out there, everyone, and start growing food, whether it's on a farm, a small holding like mine, a back garden, a greenhouse, a balcony, or even just a windowsill. There's so much more I could talk about in this video, like my new composting system, but alas, if I make these videos much longer than this, people fall asleep and start complaining. So for now, from me and my family, here in the pine forests, the beautiful summer pine forests of southwest Finland. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you very soon. Enjoy the summer, everyone.
Born in a Quaker town where folks worked good and hard for the ones they loved and got above. Each day they punched their card, and when evening came back home again, they'd rest a while and say, "'Tis a hard old life, but for kids and wife we'll work as another day." When the sun rose low, back to work they'd go, singing on their way. For job and home to call our own, we'll work as another day. Oh, I grew up in a Quaker town till 18 years had passed. Then I packed my bags and I said farewell for a better life at last. And for 5 years more I studied hard, and the state paid harder still. For that better life I earned my debt on her education bill. Till I threw my cap and they all did clap and shake my hand and say, "Well done, my son, now work's begun, you'll pay that debt one day."